Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for your patience while we got that sorted out. I think we are ready to go ahead and get the webinar started. Just going to ask for your patience one more moment so that I can share my screen and get this going for us. All right, perfect. All right, so thank you for joining us this Wednesday afternoon for today's webinar. My name is Kendra Jolly, and I am the Partnership and Grants Coordinator with the Invasive Species Center, and I am going to be your moderator today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that the Invasive Species Center honors the long history of the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nations peoples on the lands now known as Canada, and strives to show respect to their ancestors, their communities, and to them individually. We greatly appreciate the significance of the lands, waters, and all living things, and offer our gratitude to the Indigenous people for their care and teachings about our earth. Our relationships with Indigenous communities are important, and we will continue to listen and learn how we can be in good relationship with Indigenous peoples, the lands and waters, and all living things, and act accordingly. The Invasive Species Center respectfully acknowledges that our head office is located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, the Batchewana and Garden River First Nations, as well as the longtime settlement of the Métis people in the Robson-Huron Treaty area. I myself am coming to you from Peterborough, which is located in the Williams Treaty area as well. So a little introduction. The Invasive Species Center is a not-for-profit organization that mobilizes action against invasive species that harm the environment, the economy, and society. We've got lots of great invasive species resources on our website, including species profiles, best management practices, and more. So please do check us out at www.invasivespeciescenter.ca. We also have a fabulous newsletter. You're able to sign up for this newsletter on our homepage. Bi-weekly media scans and event invitations will also get sent out. And this is where you can also hear about future upcoming webinars. We've also got a great invasive species training program. This is going to offer virtual courses on topics related to invasive species. Currently, we have 4 courses available that are going to focus on different forest invasives, but we are continuing to release new content regularly, so please check that out. Make sure again to check out our website to sign up to receive updates on on when any of these new courses do become available. Before we get started on today's webinar, there's a couple things I would like to mention. First, there will be time for questions after the webinar. And I'm going to ask that if you do have a question for either of our speakers at any time, that you please put those questions into the Q&A box and not in the chat. This will allow me to moderate the questions easier and be sure that we share them with our speakers to get those questions answered. If the questions go directly into the chat, they may not be seen. If you're having technical difficulties at any time, please do type them into the chat box or respond to the email found on your registration, and we will try to resolve those for you. Also, we have enabled closed captioning, so if you'd like to follow along that way, you can turn that on with the closed captioning button on your taskbar. Lastly, there will be a short survey following the webinar. If you could take some time to fill that out for us, that would be really appreciated. And now moving on to our webinar. Today's webinar is called From Concept to Action, Michipicoten First Nations Invasive Species Program. And I am pleased to introduce our speakers today. We've got Jessica Zadori and Sebastian Nyami. Jessica is an environmental professional experienced in provincial and federally governed terrestrial and aquatic environmental studies and field programs across Canada. Jessica currently works as a biodiversity coordinator at the Michipicoten First Nation, focused on blending Western science and traditional ecological knowledge to inform industry and research projects taking place in the Michipicoten First Nations traditional territory. We've also got Sebastian Nyami, and Sebastian, I do hope I am saying your last name correctly. As a forestry liaison specialist at Michipicoten First Nation, Sebastian works with the community and the government to ensure the sustainable and respectful management of the forest resources and the protection of the Indigenous rights and interests. He facilitates the communication and collaboration between the First Nation and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, as well as other stakeholders such as industry, municipalities, and environmental organizations. Sebastian has a diploma in forestry technician from Algonquin College, where he's learned the technical and practical skills of forest management, such as inventory, mapping, planning, harvesting, and silviculture. He also has a background in fine and studio arts, which gives a creative and aesthetic prospect on forestry. He has experience as an assistant management forester and a forester intern at the MNR, and contributed to the development of implementation of forest management plans, policies, and programs. He is very passionate about community forestry, sustainable forest management, and forestry education. He aims to promote the ecological, social, and economic benefits of forests for the present and future generations. So that's enough of hearing from me. I am going to stop sharing my screen and hand things over to Jessica, who I believe is starting us off today.
All right, let me get situated here. I think you should be able to see that now.
Yeah, we can see that, Jessica.
Perfect. Okay, so let me just minimize the screen here and I'll get into it. Okay, thanks, Kendra, for getting us started in a good way today. Sebastian and I are going to split things up a little bit. I'm going to start by talking about our nation-specific clean equipment protocol in our 2024 fieldwork, and Sebastian's going to take us through our follow-up 2025 field program. Before I officially jump in, I just want to thank our 2024 funders at the Invasive Species Center, who made this project possible through the ISAF funding, or Invasive Species Action Fund program. So here's just a quick agenda for the next hour. I'm going to take you through an introduction to Michipicoten First Nation, some background and overview of our Clean Equipment Protocol project. I'll show you some photos of our wash areas, and then I'll wrap up my portion of the presentation with some lessons learned. Sebastian's then going to jump into our 2025 field program, which focused on mapping the existing impacts from invasive species on reserve lands, as well as the development of culturally relevant training. More specifically, Sebastian's going to go through and discuss the details regarding our current land inventory, a survey scope and methodology, some relevant plant ID practices, and finish up with an overview of cleanup and next steps of where our program's at. So like Kendra said, I'll just ask you to hold all your questions to the end or put them in the Q&A function, and then we'll have a 15-minute question period. All right. So to give you a spatial idea of where we're working, here's a map of Lake Superior. Michipicoten First Nation, or I'll probably refer to it as MFN for short. We're a small community located on the northeastern side of Lake Superior. We have about 1,300 members. I've placed the red star here over MFN's main reserve area. It's called Gross Cap 49. And this is where we focused our clean equipment protocol as a first step, with an approximate managed area of about 35 kilometers squared. So first, I just wanted to define what a clean equipment protocol is for everyone. This is really simple because it's already defined within provincial standard operating procedures. So a CEP, or Clean Equipment Protocol, is a document created to help with the prevention and spread of invasive plants by contaminated heavy equipment through equipment washing. So equipment washing is really important to prevent unintentional introduction, which can occur when invasive vegetation is spread on equipment or vehicles through water, mud, plant material that's contaminated with the seeds of invasive species. Literature currently notes that about 96 to 99% of seeds can remain attached to vehicles under dry conditions for up to 260 kilometers of travel on paved and unpaved road. So they stick there for quite some time and distance. But by inspecting and cleaning our equipment using simple guidelines, we can greatly reduce the risk of spreading these seeds. So the purpose of our project was pretty simple, that being to prevent the introduction of terrestrial invasive species into reserve lands through the implementation of an area-specific and MFN-accepted clean equipment protocol. So going into our 2024 field season, We already had some draft documentation relating to clean equipment and invasive species concerns. So our focus for 2024 was really on finalizing everything into an official CEP document, as well as the process of implementing it. Also through our ISAF funding, or Invasive Species Action Funding, we're able to achieve several other things, including the purchase of necessary washing equipment. We were able to educate staff and community members on invasive species within our specific reserve lands. We were also able to collect data relating to invasive species which are present through active monitoring of equipment wash areas. So why did we feel necessary to implement something like a clean equipment protocol? We basically had community members coming to our lands department, telling us about the changing conditions they're seeing in traditional areas. So we have a ton of industry operating within our traditional territory. As you can see from the photos, we have some large-scale transmission lines. We have a lot of large-scale active mining. But in combination with this, we also realize that there's a lack of legislative requirements relating to invasive species management for industry-related projects. In addition to the lack of legislation, we also noticed a severe lack of compliance from our government bodies in ensuring that industries are meeting their requirements for invasive species management when applied even. So in our experience, it's become clear that no ministry really has a strong handle on invasive species. So we decided to kind of take it into our own hands. We also have a huge focus on prevention over management. We're really lucky at MFN to be in an area where many invasive species are relatively new compared to our southern peers. But with climate change, we really want to be on top of prevention and establishing processes for managing that before cost and effort really build up of tracking and removing invasive species once already in the area. So we set out a few goals for ourselves when starting the project. So I have 3 of them listed here. The big one being that everything we do at the lands department, we want to maintain harmony and balance with Mother Earth to preserve plant resources for the next 7 generations. So a lot of our work is guided by the 7 grandfather teachings, truth, humility, respect, love, honesty, bravery, and wisdom. We also hope to implement and promote Indigenous-led monitoring and control projects to address invasive species in the area. And then to also braid traditional ecological knowledge, or TEK, with Western science to develop resources for MFN staff to utilize in the future of invasive species management. So this is just a quick overview of what our clean equipment protocol addresses. It focuses a lot on process, so explaining what types of vehicles and equipment need cleaning, when these inspections should be completed, how these vehicles should be inspected, and then most importantly, how to track and document that the cleaning is being done properly. So just to provide some context into exactly what we're trying to combat currently, I put 8 images in here of our species of concern in the area right now. So I'll just speak on a few of those. We have giant hogweed, which I'm sure a lot of people are aware of. This was recently noticed in our area and has caused a lot of health and safety concerns for not just our department, but for our land users and community. I also want to touch on Phragmites. So as of 2024, we did not have any documented patches of invasive frag on reserve lands. So we really wanted to focus on preventing this species specifically from establishing. I also want to take a second to acknowledge that common mullein and several other of these species that we're looking to manage can be used for medicinal and traditional purpose. However, because of how densely they're populating our areas, it was causing concern for the community. But we do recognize that a lot of these, non-native species do have traditional use in medicine and ceremony. And the last one I wanted to provide some details on is bindweed. So this is an interesting one. We have several native types of bindweed in the area, and it's become really, really difficult to identify the native bindweed versus invasive bindweed. So similar to Phragmites, like it's very specific identification cues. It's additionally complicated for bindweed because it's an early successional species, so it thrives within our impacted areas. It tends to create a matted foliage, so really hinders, the use of ATVs. A lot of, if there's foot traffic going through the area, it can cause tripping. So while we recognize that this species has temporary impacts in our area, we still want to, manage them because of its current impacts to traditional land use. So these are just a couple photos. On the left, you can see a patch of common mullein, and this was present on our reserve area along an access road that was utilized over the past few years for a construction project related to utilities. So prior in baseline assessment, we did not see any common mullein in this area. But after, the construction is complete and the area has been cleared, you can see all this common mullein has popped up. So again, another really important inspiration for our project. On the right, you can see an image which demonstrates how invasive species can kind of choke out or really impact our traditional use plants. So in this image, you can see how the bindweed is climbing up a wild raspberry bush and wrapping around its stems and leaves. So this was a big concern. So this is just a quick timeline for our project. You can see it covers a full field season. We started in May and wrapped up in the early fall winter. I did want to show you this kind of timeline just to highlight off one key aspect of this that I think is really important, and that being the establishment of baseline conditions. In my opinion, this is one of the most important steps in the process. So, and there's a couple reasons that I think this and why I wanted to highlight it. Collecting baseline conditions is what ultimately allows us to complete comparisons over time. It's also what allows us to understand what's present and plan for our site-specific conditions at different wash stations. It's what allows us to monitor the progress over time and ultimately determine success of the project and implement continued improvement over time. It's also important to ensure that, wash areas are clear of invasive plants before we start washing equipment, because we don't want to be recontaminating it at the site of washing once it's already expected clean. And then we have, let me see. Oh, we want to be able to differentiate between what invasive species are already present versus what's being brought into the area. So by clearing the site at a baseline condition, and we know what's already there, if we see new species, popping up in latter seasons, it's likely because, those seeds have been washed off equipment in that area. So this is just an aerial image of a small piece of MFN's reserve lands. I included this to help give us some spatial context to the location of our wash stations with reference to our community on White Sands Beach. So you can see that at the left of the image, and you can see our two little wash stations labeled there, 1 and 2. Wash stations were placed in areas that could be easily accessed by, heavy equipment, as well as in proximity to where equipment laydown is already completed on reserve. We also focused on selecting sites with pre-disturbed conditions. So then we didn't have to clear any new brush or trees. So it's a drone image of our first wash station. You can see here it's a pre-disturbed area. It was previously used for a laydown of blasted rock from a highway project. So the ground is heavily compacted through the middle here, which we thought was good for bringing more heavy equipment on. And it had sufficient space for big equipment to turn around, access the wash station, and get back to the road. This is a drone image of our second wash station, which is located closer to the community itself. We also placed this one in proximity to our construction crew, our carpentry crew shop. So that's where they're bringing a lot of their equipment for laydown. And since it's right down the street, it makes it a really convenient location for them to do the wash before they access the community proper. So this is just a close-up of how our temporary wash sites have been set up. You can see they're pretty simple but functional. We did want to go with a temporary setup before, settling on something more permanent for built infrastructure. So this is how we tested it out. You can see here we have a compacted gravel base. We excavated a little bit of the ground surface here and filled it back in with some loose gravel to help with drainage of the area and mitigate pooling water. We also have some erosion control fencing placed to surround the area. This is to mitigate seeds moving off-site into neighboring natural areas. A key part of that is to make sure you're checking your erosion control fencing before doing washes, because if there's rips and tears, those seeds are still going to get through. So we paid specific attention to that. All right, so to get into our results now, our biggest finding really was that we need more time before we can truly establish the true success of the CEP. We realized that, one season of field work didn't really give us enough to go on in terms of like the reestablishments and what specific species we're seeing. So we want to give it, a few years to really make conclusions about. But we did have some smaller takeaways, those being that we did have limited reestablishment of invasive species in the wash area at the end of the first season. So those original weed pulls at baseline time did have an impact. We also had documentation of similar species to those documented at baseline. So we weren't seeing a ton of new species in the area. And we assume that's because we were working with a lot of local construction companies. So we're not going to be seeing, super random species we don't normally see. And then we also wanted to, do additional monitoring in the 2025 field season during leaf out. So we had a couple key physical deliverables. We were able to come away from the first season with a completed Michipicoten specific clean equipment protocol document. We were also able to formulate a couple clean equipment protocol checklists for several different types of equipment. So you can see here this example checklist, simple again, but functional. And then we also have similar checklists for, different types of equipment like backhoes, graders, tractors, that sort of thing. So just to go into some lessons learned, the first being that a dedicated team and community can make a difference. So it's important to recognize that, the system's not perfect, but making an effort does make a difference. And it could be a long time before we see measurable impacts from the CEP, but it's worth doing regardless. The second big takeaway was that industry is willing and able to adapt. So with clear instructions like our MFN specific CEP and some support, industry has been willing to participate in this process. We found that including the documents in any tender processes at the beginning of the project was really a good first step because it ultimately adds transparency to the expectations that the First Nation is setting out. This one won't come as a surprise, but change is really hard and takes a lot of time. So we're trying to implement a behavioral change here, which is really difficult and requires a lot of repetition. We recognize that no one enjoys adding extra steps to their day-to-day, but changing the culture on construction sites is something that we're going to continue to focus on. And then another obvious one at the bottom, prevention over management is key. We've really realized that management is very laborious, it's very expensive, So we want to do what we can before, those facets are required. All right, and then looking into next steps, this is going to be the last slide of my presentation before we transition into Sebastian's 2025 field season. But we have a couple next steps determined. We focused on immediate and long-term and separating them that way. So our immediate steps were to continue the implementation and expansion of the CEP, including adding the document to future tender, like I said. So our contractors coming onto the reserve are aware that this is something that is mandatory for implementation for all construction projects happening within our reserve lands. Second, we're hoping to begin mapping of invasive species hotspots to monitor densities over time and the success of weed pulls. And this is what Sebastian's going to jump into for our 2025 season. And then on to long term, we're going to continue to work with the community to determine a permanent location for our built infrastructure. I mentioned earlier, we're working with temporary setups right now, but we do hope to move that to something built in the long term. And then last but not least, we hope to continue to build our community capacity with respect to invasive species identification, as well as with citizen science applications. So we're helping to map and document these things at a community level through citizen science. But that wraps up my portion, and I'll hand it off to Sebastian.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jessica and Sebastian. That was very educational, and I learned a lot listening to you both speak about your projects and the clean equipment protocols. We do have a couple of questions that are coming in. The first one looks like it's coming in from Daniel. Daniel was asking, how did you dispose of the invasive species that were removed? Was there any worry about further spreading some of the seeds while transporting the removed species? And what steps did you take to minimize the potential spread?
Absolutely. So that's, yeah, before we even started the weed pull, we wanted to get that timing right. So we did a little bit of research on that kind of that most wanted list and figured when these plants are likely to go to seed and try to make sure that we are addressing them in the right window this year to minimize the seed drop off the plants. So for locally, at least, the white clover had immature and unviable seed that was strongly holding to the plant, and so when we're transporting them, that wasn't a concern for the disposal. The general best management practice for a lot of invasive species, including this field project, was simply to bag them, black trash bags. You make sure that they're really well sealed. You try to leave them in an area that has a lot of sun so that they kind of bake in there and kills off as much of the plant as possible, ideally before any animals might be getting in there, kind of thing, and spreading it from where it's been dumped. I think those are three questions you had there.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sebastian. Nora has a question here. I'll give you the background, and then she's got kind of a summarized version. So she says, it seems that the province should be enacting legislation for prevention, decontamination of equipment everywhere. The amount of Phragmites infestation from heavy equipment along highways is alarming. The network of industrial logging roads is always expanding into more remote areas, therefore an obvious gateway to invasive spread. She's wondering how a study of the economics of prevention versus cleanup might be carried out, if you have thoughts on that, and if doing so might compel the province to act. And then to put it simply, what a scoped study of economic impact of prevention versus no enforcement or unchecked spread, kind of how would you undertake that if you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, I can speak on this one. Nora, I think you have a couple interesting different topics here that you're discussing. So as you know, I'm sure you're all aware, in Ontario, we're in a conservative government who is kind of taking down a lot of legislation. Like I'm sure everyone's aware of kind of the the Bill 5, the stripping of the Environmental Assessment Act and the Mining Act and everything that comes along with it. So right now, I don't think pushing for legislation is going to be an uphill battle, like you mentioned. It's quite difficult. An alternative that we've been finding in lieu of, mandated legislation is leveraging our duty to consult rights through the nation. So as part of these large-scale projects at the front end, the Crown has a duty to consult with the First Nations present on the traditional territory. And because of that, we've been able to leverage that relationship and require these different processes for, clean equipment protocols and invasive species management planning to be implemented in the process through that private ability, from First Nations. So that's something I'd recommend to, people under the duty to consult, which is also, functional in a public comment period for environmental assessment. In terms of the economic considerations, that's also something that's not big in Canada right now, is establishing, dollar values to natural resources. I think there's both positives and concerns with that. Like you said, it would help really illustrate how expensive it is to manage these species on a back end. A single day weed pull, that's something that has to be done by hand. It can't be mechanically done a lot of the time, or, God forbid, mass chemical treatment throughout the province is not going to be an amazing alternative either. The challenge with, assigning these different resources an economic value is that, again, in an accommodation perspective, when companies are destroying these different resources, who's to say that that's not of more value to you or to someone else than it was to the person making that classification? And then you run into a precedent setting situation, and it's values is subjective, so it leads to a complicated situation there. I hope that answered the questions.
I'll let you know if she comes in with any sort of follow-up. But I'm curious myself, for smaller, maybe community groups that are looking to establish some sort of protocol, but maybe don't have the resources for the larger wash stations. What would you recommend for kind of smaller, just starting out, how to focus on those clean equipments and to reduce the spread?
I think there really is a ton of options. There is the standard operating procedures, like the best management practices that already exist. So you don't need to be developing something that's necessarily area specific. You can pick and choose from the existing protocols that are publicly accessible online, through the Invasive Species Center. You had all those different links on there, Kendra. There's definitely a best management practice section that would be readily applicable to smaller communities. It's also, there's some simple options in terms of equipment. Like, it's not always has to be, truck bed power washer. It can be something as easy as like a hose to wash down your vehicle in your driveway before, taking a camping trip. And like one of the conclusions of ours and our lessons learned was like, really, like, small impacts matter, and just making an effort really does matter. So cleaning your boots after a hike, like, those things do make a difference, and a lot of the time are economically a lot more feasible than something like a temporary or permanent infrastructure wash station that a company or NGO puts on, but it's something that can be done at a individual level even.
Excellent, thank you. And also with your wash stations, they look great, but I'm curious, what do you supply the items for those that choose to clean their equipment, or do they bring their own?
We've made it like an economic resource for the community, which is something I didn't get too much into today. So I mentioned that we include the CEP in our bids and tenders documents. So the documents that go out to construction companies wanting to take on work as a requirement. And part of that is that they have to use the wash stations, and there is a cost associated with that. So we have, a cost associated with someone operating our equipment, using our equipment in the space. So they do pay for those resources, and it is a small economic stream at this point, but as it grows, we hope to maybe rent that equipment out to larger projects off reserve. And I think there's a lot of different directions it can go, but yeah, we're starting small with that one, but they do pay for the resources that are being used.
No, I think that's great and a great way to get that stream coming in and to get word out. With the checklist that you've created, do you share those publicly? Is that something that's kind of proprietary within Michipicoten?
We don't have anything publicly shared at this time. A lot of our stuff is based off the existing SOPs. Again, we made them area specific and community specific on what specifically we need, but yeah, the format I would say is really simple to recreate using those already existing documents.
No, they look great, and it sounds like it's working out well for you. And I'm very excited to see the changes and the impact that it makes going into the future. So I'm just going to share my screen here for one more moment as we wrap up this afternoon. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to do. There we go. All right, so as you all saw there, I want to thank you for listening, and a big thank you to both Sebastian and Jessica for spending some time with us this afternoon. As they mentioned, they were 2024 recipients of the Invasive Species Action Fund, so we're always happy to hear about those projects and see those impacts. Just a reminder, there is going to be a brief survey coming your way after the webinar this afternoon, and we do hope that you take the time to fill it out. And I would like to mention that we do have a special session coming up on plants and partners, a multifaceted approach to controlling buckthorn and invasions. That's coming to you on September 17th at 1 p.m. With Mike Schuster from the University of Minnesota. So if you'd like to register for that, all the information will be sent out shortly. And again, thank you so much, Jessica and Sebastian. We very much appreciate your time today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Miigwech, everyone. Thank you.